Thank you for attending the Scary DR Stories Iteration Volume 7 of this year's webinar. First of all, I want to wish everybody a happy Halloween and really thank everyone for the involvement within this session. If you're new to this or just joining at the moment, a few weeks ago, we released a statement or a call for papers for any folks within the industry across the globe who have been through some type of spooky scenario regarding DR or backup or any type of recovery scenario that they've seen that has really provided something that really scared them. And we want to keep things fun and elevated and really just talk about what we're seeing and just the really interesting stuff that really happens in the field that you can't really account for. So for today's agenda, we've chosen 3 specific stories that we were really happy to read. Not only were they frightening from a perspective of downtime and what it did to the organization, especially their time, but also the way it was written. They put a lot of effort, and honestly, some of them read like a Stephen King novel. But there were so many really good submissions that I was very happy to see. So the way today's webinar is going to go is I'm just going to dive in a little bit and understanding and analysis of the cost of downtime, based on some of the research we've done. After that, we'll transition to the 3 stories that we've selected, and those folks will introduce themselves. And those stories are The Tale of the Fattest Finger, The Curse of the Lost VM and Scary Long RPOs, and The Horrors of Alphabetical Sorting. After that, we'll take a quick understanding of what went wrong and some of their lessons learned. And from there, we're really going to take a look at why is it that we see so many of these issues, and what is it about traditional recovery that we would call deformed during Halloween, but really inherently flawed any other part of the year. And then from there, we'll talk about how do we just transition just from DR and backup and really look forward to surviving and addressing all these downtime issues with continuous data protection. So as we start, when we sent out this call for ideas and received all these stories, we saw a lot of the usual suspects, right? Natural disasters, fires, floods, hurricanes. We also saw a lot of outages, file corruptions, accidental deletions. But the one that resonated the most, and I think every year as we do this, we're seeing a lot more stories around it, is around ransomware, right? So we've always had disasters, we've always had human failure. But the ransomware, I think, is the newest one and some of the most scary ones that we're seeing. So it's always interesting to hear, and this is a little bit of a word cloud of all of the ones that we've received. So it's interesting to hear about how ransomware is actually one of the leading, as we would call it, providers of downtime and disruption. Now, before we get into these actual spooky stories, let's take an understanding of why it actually is so scary. Why is it that downtime has such an impact on an organization? Well, if you think about it, a few years ago, the market has changed. Not only has technology advanced and evolved so rapidly, but more importantly, the market has adapted. And the market's expectations, both internally and externally, as in your customers, have less and less patience for downtime. Now, a few months ago, we commissioned a survey with IDC, the analyst organization focused on IT, and asked them to survey over 500 IT pros across the globe, right? Regardless of industry that they're in and whatnot. These were system administrators, infrastructure, architects, VPs of IT, director of ITs. And the answers they came back with were astonishing, right? One of the most alarming ones that we saw was the updated cost, or the updated average cost of downtime. And that was $250,000. Now, if we think of it, this number is in the aggregate, meaning that there is quite a few smaller organizations that have smaller downtime figures. But if we think of it in the scope of a large Fortune 500 organization, we realize it's much larger. But now, assuming that this is total average, which is $250,000 per hour across all organizations, at an average of 8 hours of downtime per year, that's unplanned downtime, that's a cost of $2 million. Now, this could be because of disasters. This could be because of some type of operational failure, some type of hardware failure, or even ransomware. But the point is that every year, the expectations continue to rise. SLAs become more strict, yet budgets remain the same, and these downtime risks are here and are growing. So it's always interesting to see these high-level statistics, but once we dove a little bit deeper, we saw some even more alarming statistics. 91% of them experienced a tech-related business disruption. And that business disruption led to severe issues. Now, 84% of the people surveyed, of those 500, experienced a malicious attack in the past 12 months that they know about, right? Some of the things that people always say, a common anecdote of ransomware, is that there are people who are aware they've been hit by a cyber attack and those who have not yet found out. But then we saw a significant number of those, up from 49% from last year's survey, that actually suffered data loss. And so when you think of that, out of the 500 folks in the statistically significant sample size, half of them suffered some form of data loss related to ransomware. So before we dive into kind of understanding that a little bit more, let's get to why we're really here. And that's understanding some of the stories that colleagues, your own colleagues, have gone through. And that's why I want to introduce Chris here with the tale of the fattest finger.
Thank you. My name's Chris Holda. I have been in IT operations for over 20 years. The majority of that has been in the healthcare setting where 24/7 operations are absolutely critical. The story that I tell is a true one with only a couple of names and some embellishments added for detail. This is the tale of the fattest fat finger. It was a dark and stormy night. With an approved change control in hand and work to be done, Jerry sat down at his terminal to tackle a dreaded SAN migration. With only the most basic of tools, he was armed with a torch, pitchfork, and robocopy. His mission was clear: replicate the data from the old environment to the new environment while keeping permissions and metadata intact. For this job, a simple Control-C, Control-V wouldn't do. He needed to replicate the data, something he had done countless times, but this time, it was different. Maybe it was the distraction of the rain on the window, the lightning and thunder in the distance, or the active session of World of Warcraft on his second monitor. But Jerry wasn't feeling like himself. He was tired. He was distracted. His fingers, which normally danced across the keyboard, felt heavy and somehow fatter. He began his work. It was simple, straightforward even. But instead of replicating the data to the empty SAN, his fingers seemed to become heavier and fatter as each moment passed, and he replicated the empty SAN to the active data partition. Work done, he thought. The data just needs to copy, he thought. Little did he know that as he slept, the 10 terabytes of data began to disappear as if Thanos himself had snapped his fingers. The dark and stormy night got even stormier as calls began to pour in. Data that was once there was suddenly missing. The replication was doing exactly what the fat fingers had told it to do: replace the data from one location with the non-existing data from the other. More and more users called in. The business ground to a halt. The damage was done. That night turned into an extremely long weekend. I would like to say that this story has a happy ending, and maybe that happy ending exists somewhere. Perhaps it is at the end of the multiple tape backups containing that 10 terabytes of data. For this is a tale from yesteryear, when backups happened on tape and were loaded into a large tape vault. And after close to 65 hours of restore time, the data was mostly back. Everyone was tired. No one was happy, but hard lessons were learned by all. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. That was, first of all, excellently written. Really enjoyed that. And if you look at some of the lessons learned from that, what were the dreary consequences, right? Most importantly, it's the interruption of your business. Now, as we've discussed, right, previously with downtime, especially when you're working in verticals such as healthcare, government, retail, there should be no tolerance for downtime. So when something like this happens, it just puts an enormous strain on the organization, right? If you think about what digital initiatives you had to work on and what other things that were actually part of your day job that you had to address that were ruined or had to be postponed, or even your weekend as well, which is always important. So, it's not just about the direct data loss or the time that it took to restore, but it's about the resources involved, right? The mind share, the head count, everybody having to address this issue instead of the business growth. So you put that really well, and I really enjoyed hearing that. And so we'll move on to the next story by Stephen, and this is The Curse of the Lost VM and Scary Long RPOs.
All right, thanks everybody. My name is Stephen Hufford, and I have been in IT operations management for over 15 years now. And so this is The Curse of the Lost VM and Scary Long RPOs. The story you're about to hear is one never of its kind. Over a period of 2 months in 2016, there was a string of puzzling and horrific serial interruptions and outages perpetrated by one terrifying data center. These cases would come to be known locally as the curse of Colo 214. The first event happened on what seemed to be a normal day like any other, when suddenly the IT department was flooded with calls and emails from all over reporting mass loss of connectivity. We quickly jumped into action, testing all local systems and the connectivity. Everything was up. What could it be? After verifying that the connectivity to any of our outside branches were indeed down, we focused our efforts by working with the data center, which all of our production servers were hosted at. We discovered the issue, a fiber cut due to construction, killing the connections to the MPLS used by our branches. After a period of 6 hours, order was restored and it was written off as an isolated incident. Then the following week, 4 days after the first event, again, the IT department began to receive reports of a scene eerily familiar to the horror that had happened just days prior. All connectivity dead. Could this be true? Could this be happening to our environment again? After our initial investigation, we found the source to be the data center. This time, a core switch had took its own life and all connectivity with it. Again, after several hours, order was restored and we started to move on, trying to put these recent tragedies behind us. When 3 weeks later, as we were slowly forgetting about the seemingly random acts of terror aimed at our connectivity, I was awoken at 4 a.m. Our ERP system was down. Feared that the VM had been lost, immediately I opened up my laptop and am able to ping the server. I quickly think that the SQL servers must have somehow been stopped and needed to be restarted. As I opened the services on the ERP server, I noticed the services stopped. Quickly trying to restart it, I am met with an error. I open SQL Manager, again met with the same result. I look at the event viewer and it's telling me that the drive with the log files required to start the service cannot be found. Opening File Explorer, navigate to the list of drives and our data drive is gone, vanished without a trace. My heart sinks and stomach turns. I quickly call to the data center to get some assistance on trying to locate the missing drive. And after a couple hours, they tell me the only thing that can be done is a VM restore from the backup. At first, this wasn't a big deal. It was Friday. I knew that restoring a 3 terabyte drive would take some time, so I quickly notified the team and the guys at the top. Not much could be done, but there would be no data lost. Almost as soon as I reported it, I get a call from the data center. The event happened during our VM backup job, and the last known backup is 24 hours prior. Any and all transactions completed in our ERP systems are gone. After discussing with all parties, it was decided to proceed, and we would do our best to recover any lost transactions with our accounting department. 22 hours into the restore, the restore fails. There's not enough space on our SAN. Things were going from bad to worse. The data center quickly allocated more space and kicked off the restore job a second time. 25 hours later, the VM and the drive is back. Luckily for us, our SQL backups were being stored on another server, and we were able to store the database and recovering all lost transactions. All of our hardware was hosted at the data center, and we wanted answers. Profanities were being hurled with full force, such as SLAs, breach of contract, financial reimbursements for companies for staff time. The data center had no explanation as to why these series of unfortunate events happened the way they did. We quickly picked up and moved out of that cursed facility into a new data center, leaving behind all memories of what had happened. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. The months became years, and with all nervousness and fear seemed distant. The worst was behind us and life was good. Every so often, though, when I hear a call that a phone line is down or see a ticket that a folder can't be reached, the hair on the back of my neck stands up and perspiration begins on my brow. Could it be back? 6 months after we left the data center, I heard that it had burned down in a freak electrical fire started by a stuck bag of pork rinds in a malfunctioning vending machine. There was no human life loss, but all the hardware and infrastructure were completely destroyed. The curse got what it wanted in the end. Maybe we were all spared to tell the tale. Okay, the last part I made up, but the rest is actually true. Thank you.
I was about to say. Thank you so much. I don't believe in curses, but a pork rind that might do it. But no, we really appreciate that and highlighting, not just the time it took to restore, but just all of the issues that you had accordingly, and especially with the backup job, right? There's nothing worse than being 20 hours into a backup job and then it failing, or also having to rely, on large backup windows. So, really well written, really well told already for the both stories. So this is very exciting. Thank you so much. Now we're going to move to the final story, and I try not to do this in alphabetical order to not ensure some flashbacks for Balvinder, but I'll let him introduce himself.
Oh, hi, my name is Balvinder Singh. I hope you can hear me. Yeah. I
Yeah.
work for the National Health Service in the UK, where I work as a developer, and I've been working as a developer for over 30 years now. And this happened when I was much younger and at a different organisation. And like all good horror stories, it begins on a dark and stormy night. On this night, the full moon glared balefully when I was raised from my stupor by the call of the night operators. Normally, they would be busy running around like headless chickens trying to complete the nightly voodoo rites of raising the Prince of Darkness. But tonight, the night operators were shuffling around, looking for steaks and garlic to ward off the vampires that would feast on the company's blood if the prince were not delivered by sunrise, they said. So faced with this, I started to look at the entrails of the executed programs. All I could see were zombies. Reporting programs tried to run, but then scratched themselves immediately and collapsed into a heap. These programs were dead. If they hadn't been nailed down to their perches Monty Python style, they would have been pushing up daisies. What the not lob was going on? Then I started looking at the database fields and saw total devastation. I would have to raise the data backups from the deep dark vaults and roll the dice to see how the system had double sixed itself. It was then I hit 666. The number of the beast had also corrupted the data in the local backups. This meant a perilous journey to Mordor, where the offsite backups were stored. So after the perilous journey, I found a good backup and rolled forward the transactions until the data was no longer corrupt. But what had caused the corruption? Looking at what had gone on in the recent history, the main overnight program had been recompiled, but the code changes were minor, and there was no way these changes could have caused this level of chaos. So I started to look further into the compiler output, line by line. And then I noticed that the in-memory data tables weren't in the same order as they had been in the previous compiled version. Instead of being in the processing sequence order, they were now in an alphabetical order. And then I noticed the compiler had also been updated, and it seems that this new compiler took it upon itself to rearrange all the tables to be in an alphabetical sorted order to make it easier to track. But even then, a rearrangement of memory should have not corrupted the database. So where did the fault lie? With a sense of deep foreboding, I started to delve further into the twisting branches of the code and discovered an undiscovered bound checking error. This error had been in the code ever since the beginning. It had not been found in testing because it had been overwriting a memory area that wasn't written back to the database. It was with mounting horror that I realized that the alphabetic sorting had moved the effects of this error to now corrupt the main table, and this was written back to the database. Eventually, after 3 days, I managed to recover the system and without losing any data. But ever since then, I've been haunted by the fear of sorting things into alphabetical order. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Balvinder. That was well told and well written. It sounds like a pretty painful experience, and now you've had to deal with a new phobia. But thank you so much, to the three folks who've come on here and told their stories. There was a lot of effort put into this, and towards the end of the webinar, we'll actually announce who the winner is, and we'll announce the prizes and whatnot. So big kudos to you guys, not just for telling your story and discussing it, but also the way you did it and the effort. So I really thank you for that, and just kind of giving a lot of your colleagues a kind of a visual as to where downtime can come from and what could be some of the issues and starts and whatnot. But when we look at all three of these, I wanted to also make some honorable mentions, just because although these were the three best that we really enjoyed and wanted to share with you, there was a few others that we just wanted to kind of give an honorable mention to because they were very good as well. That was the Murderous Crime Scene, Powerless Power, The Specter of Ransomware, Mirrors, Mirrors Everywhere. Just want to give you guys kudos for also sending in really well written, pretty horrifying stories. Now, when we talk about all of these issues, there's always an underlying term, there's always an underlying issue for it, right? And it's all about traditional recovery. When we look at the industry, as we've discussed, how much advancement there's been, exponential growth within the last few decades. When we look at the technology that's designed to protect our data, it really hasn't seen that same level of growth. What we've seen is over decades, the same technology go through incremental changes to address everything. We started with tapes and whatnot, and then addressing virtual workloads and then cloud and whatnot. But that same technology really hasn't changed much. And it's showing because although SLAs are becoming more strict and expectations are higher, downtime still looks the same. And in the future, as we progress, especially in digital economies, downtime will not be acceptable. So what we're looking at, there needs to be an evolution of traditional data recovery. But let's take a look at why it needs to change. What are some of the inherent flaws that must evolve in order for all of us to be able to, one, avoid a lot of these horror stories, but also, things always happen, and just be able to address it, resume your operations immediately, not have to go through all of the issues and time spent and weekend and ruin on recovering your data. Now, when we look at the traditional recovery process, right, we all have our production systems, your virtualized workloads and everything else, and they're really set to a backup infrastructure. A lot of this backup infrastructure is dedicated hardware, and that also includes agents as well, some software as well. Usually, from a storage perspective to offsite, to fulfill your 3-2-1 rule, there's either some type of cloud archive or tape as well. Now, when we look at this specific system already, there are already a few issues at hand that must evolve. Now, when we look at those challenges, it's the fact that backup copies, snapshot-based copies, which is all of traditional recovery is based on snapshots, you're really performing dailies. Some folks have gone all the way down to taking snapshots every 4 hours, but the majority, you're looking at daily snapshot copies. Now, the reason this happens is because there is a huge performance impact on your production environment as well. And so, although people would love to take more snapshots, both from a storage perspective and from a production perspective, it's just not possible. So there's already a protection gap there, or a window where you might have to just assume that you're going to lose that data. You're also dealing with dedicated hardware that has its own costs, that has issues with scale as your environment grows and you see continued data growth. These backup technologies, as we would call them, they're not really suited for DR today. And we're actually moving away from just talking about disaster recovery or just backup. We're really just talking about being able to be resilient, to be able to recover regardless of the threat, regardless of where the data lives, that you're able to recover, not having these isolated, siloed DR and backup departments and software and tools. Now, the other issue as well is application consistency, and we'll dive in a little bit deeper to that later as well. So as we look at all of these issues, and especially, as we've already seen in some of the stories, there is the dreaded fact that maybe tapes are the only thing left that can guarantee you the recoverability of your data. Now, that's not to say tape isn't a bad idea in certain instances, but should it be your only option to recover your data when you've seen your entire environment encrypted? For example, think of an example of ransomware, and I'll actually use that example later on to kind of talk about how this is a flawed, inherent flaw within the recovery process. But let's start a little bit with the backup windows, right? Because you have your dailies and your snapshots, you're only able to take a snapshot every, let's say 4 hours, but really we're looking at 24 hours. Now, if you're hit from ransomware at some point, even if everything is working perfectly, even if all of your operations are impeccable and you recover immediately, you're still having an immediate gap in your data. There's still an addressed, accepted loss of data. Now, for certain small businesses, this isn't as high of a priority. When you're a mid-sized business, but especially an enterprise organization, just the amount of data that's transacted in 24 hours, whether that's point of sale, whether that's internal tools, any type of analysis, that is already an unacceptable amount of data loss. And as we continue growing in our use of data, as folks, adopt IoT strategies and whatnot, there is going to be even less patience for this. And so there can never be a better option when you think about snapshot technology because of the strain that it makes on your production environment. So something's got to give there. Now, another issue is, especially if you're an enterprise, think of these very large enterprise applications that you have and their requirements, right? They require a lot of storage. They have even different OSs, but mostly they sit on multiple VMs. Now, if you're simply performing your daily backup, that would work, right? As long as you're storing it for compliance reasons. But in the case in that you have to actually recover this data, this is now a very, very complex enterprise application chain, meaning that because there's multiple VMs, there are now different checkpoints from the point that backup started to where it ended, where you have to figure out what to recover and when, find a common denominator in order to effectively recover one application. The current recovery strategies don't really allow for you to recover cohesive applications in a seamless way. When you think of how much time it takes to restore, there's a lot, especially for enterprises, there's a lot of time dedicated to recovering these complex enterprise application chains. So, we've seen the protection gap issue and we've seen the enterprise application recovery issue. These are two inherent flaws, and we won't get into a lot of the pricing and tape and whatnot. These are kind of two of the main ones that I wanted to address. Now, I've shared what some of the flaws are of traditional data recovery. Now, although Zerto, we're going to talk to you about Zerto's continuous data protection, keep an objective eye to this because, as you've seen, the market is now starting to adopt continuous data protection. But I want to position this as key requirements in order for you to evolve from that traditional recovery process to truly have continuous availability or continuous data protection, or CDP as we like to call it. Now, what are the key things required for you to truly have continuous data protection? Well, it starts with getting rid of those snapshots, right? Having hypervisor-based replication. That's at the heart of continuous data protection. But you also need something to recover and to be able to do so granularly. That's where journal-based recovery is. But you also cannot have to deal with very complex enterprise applications chains. So you have to be able to have application consistency in your recovery. And last but not least, you need long-term data retention. You don't just need continuous data protection for, 1 to 2 day retention policies. As an organization, you need to be able to have the confidence that you can recover your data from a few seconds ago to a few years from now. Depending on your industry, more that could be 5, 10, 15, or whatnot. But ultimately, these are the 4 key elements that you need in order to have continuous data protection. We'll go over them one by one to really understand how that works. And we'll use ransomware as a specific example and use case to kind of give some clarity to this. Now, when we talk about hypervisor-based replication, what do we mean there? Well, we're not talking about agents. We're not talking about snapshots. We really think of this as a continuous stream of your data that's observing the changes every 4 to 5 seconds and recording those. What this means is that there is no production impact on your environment. You're always protected. Your recovery is fast because you have a continuous stream and an ability to tap into that whenever you need it, every 4 or 5 seconds, not every 4 hours or every day or every week, every few seconds. But most importantly, this technology is not useful if it's not vendor agnostic. You should be able to have hypervisor-based replication and continuous data protection in whatever data center you choose and whatever storage you need that fits your need, whether it's on-premise, but also adopting a cloud strategy, whether it's public or private. You need a technology that can guarantee the recovery of your data when you need it in a seamless way in any type of environment. So this is really what's at the heart of hypervisor-based of continuous data protection, which is hypervisor-based replication. Now, when we get to the journal, let's look at an example of, in an ideal scenario, you're hit by ransomware at a specific point in time. Now, because of this continuous stream of your data, having changes recorded every 4 seconds, you can simply roll back. You can rewind and recover that data just a few seconds ago. This doesn't mean having to evaluate when your last backup job was done and having to go over there and address it and then pray that you have recoverability. Really just resume. If you're alerted, 1-2 days that you have ransomware, simply resume your operations. But you need to be able to have granular recovery, whether you need to recover your files, VMs, complete applications, or even entire sites. You need the flexibility to know that you can resume operations and mitigate risk at any moment. Because as you know, ransomware is only going to get stronger, only more advanced, and we need to be able to address it. And it's not just ransomware, it's all types of cyber attacks and the traditional usual suspects that we reviewed, right, with natural disasters, outages, and deletions and whatnot. You need replication, but a journal that could really guarantee the recovery that you need, and to do so in a very seamless manner. The other thing too, when we talk about application recovery, and how difficult it is to kind of recover multi-VM applications that are based on different checkpoints within a backup job. Well, with Zerto, what you can do is create what we call virtual protection groups, meaning that you can designate multiple VMs that are designated to an application and simply recover it as a logical, cohesive unit. So you don't have to go digging and investigating exactly when you need to be able to recover and dealing with these extremely complex changes, especially if you're in an enterprise environment, global environment. It can be very, very difficult and very painful and ruin a weekend like it has for so many folks, or even more. And so, we've reviewed the hypervisor-based replication. We've seen the journal requirements that you need. And very important, you need to be able to have application recovery to consistently recover your applications. Because it's not just about losing your data, but it's about the time dedicated to doing so. It's not just about dealing with a 12-hour data loss, but think about how many resources you've dedicated, how much mindshare you've dedicated. If you look at some of the larger examples of folks who've had consistent downtime, their entire quarters are ruined in the sense of time allocated to testing, time allocated to development. Downtime is an enormous strain and impediment of progress. And the more you can mitigate that risk, the better off you are. But you can't do so with traditional recovery as it stands. You need continuous data protection. So you can't do it just within a day or two. You need to be able to guarantee that recovery, that performance, that granular recovery, not just from a few seconds ago to be able to resort back after an attack, but to have so for years. We all have regulatory requirements or compliance and need to do so. You simply pick exactly what that retention looks like and have the same exact capabilities across your short-term and your long-term retention, sitting on a combination of primary storage and a secondary storage target site that you're choosing. So just to summarize this, addressing all of the inherent flaws with traditional, snapshot copy, backups, and recovery with siloed DR tools and backup tools, just think of it as recovery. Think of it as recovery guaranteed by continuous data protection with replication at the hypervisor level that doesn't affect your environment, with the ability to rewind and recover just a few seconds within a journal of a continuous stream of your data, to be able to effectively and easily recover large-scale applications, but also to do so at any point in time. And that's really what the value of CDP is. So if you're evaluating vendors, these are the kind of the questions you want to ask and really understand where your organization fits in these requirements. But this is exactly how Zerto delivers that value. Now, to give you guys a little bit more of perspective, we did quote a lot from this report, and this is the State of IT Resilience report, sponsored by us with IDC, and you'll see exactly all the questions that we asked all of these pros, and all of your colleagues across the globe can see exactly what we're talking about when we talk about all of the threats, all of the downtime. What are the things that you have to do in the future in order to be able to really remain an available organization, to remain always on and really move on past traditional recovery. So I want to thank you guys. I know we're probably going to have a few questions to the end, but let's do a bit of housekeeping right now, because when we started this, we announced that out of the 3 stories that would be given that were delivered, one of them would receive a $100 Amazon gift card, and the other 2 would receive $50 gift cards. So I'm going to ask my colleague John McAvoy to come in and announce the winner.
Thanks, Andy. Well, I think I need a new pair of trousers after those three stories. Ghastly stuff happening out there. Frankly, I'm not quite sure how these guys hold their nerve under, such circumstances. But our terrified panel here consulted the oracles, and we read the potent, and we passed judgment on those frightening stories submitted by our Zerto community. And the winner of Zerto's Scary DR Stories of 2019 is The Curse of the Lost DM and Scary Long RPOs by Stephen Hufford. Congratulations, Stephen.
Thank you very much. Hey, thanks, guys. I appreciate it. And like I said before, this is my first time being a part of this, and I really, I've told Andy, I've told John, I think this is great that you guys do this, and I really appreciate being a part of it this year.
Thank you so much. I think it was a close one. You all did an amazing job. One of the things else is everyone was receiving, our limited edition Scary DR Stories T-shirts. Guess what? We actually do have a few extras. So if you're on this webinar right now, just send out reply to an email that you've received on the webinar and to John, and just mention your size, and we're able to deliver you one of the shirts as well. Now, before we conclude, I wanted to address some of the questions that we had, because there were some good questions. One of the questions was, we're looking to move away from on-premises. What can Zerto offer here? Well, ultimately, as discussed, you don't really have continuous data protection or solution if you can't succeed, for example, in the public cloud or in the private cloud. So with Zerto, everything that you've seen here and all of the value of the technology applies to both Azure, AWS, IBM Cloud, and any type of managed service provider that uses us. And if you look at that, it's really about giving you the flexibility to be able to protect, to migrate your workloads from whatever area you want back to on-prem or back to the cloud. It's really just giving you the flexibility and the confidence that your data, regardless of where it lives, is going to be available for you. One of the other questions was, how easy is it to estimate our bandwidth requirements? That's an excellent question. One of the things that we have recently, and we've always had the team can kind of guide you through that from a requirements perspective, but one of the cool things that we've released is what we call Zerto Analytics. And within Zerto Analytics, there's a resource planning tool that we can kind of plug in your system and exactly evaluate what the journal recovery, what the disk size is, what are your rent requirements. So I do emphasize, if you want to check that out, ask for a free demo or contact your rep, or we can reach out and we'll be able to provide you an understanding exactly of what your environment would look like with Zerto and what your protection scope would look like. And that also applies to the question we received around what are the storage requirements for the journal. Within that planning tool, you'll be able to see what the storage requirements, and it all really depends on your short term, depending if you have a 1-day policy, 2 or 3 days, that's all going to be a little bit different, but we give you an easy way to calculate that. Now, the last question is, if I want to try Zerto, how long does it take to get up and running? Well, that's actually a great question, because it's something we pride ourselves. Talking to our system engineers who are out in the field, they've gotten people up and running, within 2 hours. POC will take much less, but you can get up and running much quicker. You got to remember, it's software only, so you're not tied to any vendor. There's no vendor lock-in, so you can come in, plug and play to the solution, and just get started protecting your data. So thank you so much for the questions. Once again, thank you so much for the stories, and I'd like to thank everyone for everyone's time. I urge you to read this report. It was really helpful for us as an organization to understand how do we deliver IT resilience to you guys, but also if you want to check out how your colleagues are evaluating downtime, this is a great opportunity. Thank you so much, everyone, and we'll send you a recorded file of this. Thank you.